¿qué tal? Muy buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Mi nombre es Roberto Salinas León. Soy el director ejecutivo del Centro Latinoamericano, Center for Latin America, de Atlas Network de Washington, D.C. Es un gran honor para mí estar con ustedes moderando este panel el día de hoy con un orador absolutamente estelar que tenemos después de los tremendos participantes en los diferentes paneles y participaciones que han tenido. Quiero agradecer sobre todo a Federico Fernández la invitación para participar el día de hoy en esta sesión. Y bueno, pues muchas felicidades por este tipo de diálogos que son tan necesarios en un ambiente, primero, tan polarizado y tan profundamente pesimista que estamos viviendo alrededor del mundo, pero en algunos casos en una forma muy marcada en nuestros países latinoamericanos. Para esto tenemos un verdadero honor de tener a uno de los personajes más importantes en términos de las narrativas, de lo que puede significar la libertad de elección, la dignidad y el progreso humano en todo el mundo. Se trata ni más ni menos que de Marian L. Tupy. Él es Senior Fellow en el Center for Liberty and Prosperity, for Global Liberty and Prosperity del Cato Institute. Y sobre todo se ha caracterizado por ser el editor, el que maneja todo el proyecto de lo que se llama humanprogress.org. Es un magnífico sitio. Nos va a estar presentando de qué se trata, cuál es este concepto de Human Progress. Y justo acaba de publicar un libro que se llama Somos Innovadores, 10 tendencias globales para ser optimistas hacia el futuro. Así que, sin más por el momento, los dejo en las mejores manos de Marian Tupy. Marian, it's a great honor for you to be participating with us today. I think the theme of human progress and your entire work, the Simon Abundance Index and your new book, I think come at an extremely relevant time for Latin America and for the entire world. So with that, I'll pass it on to you. Thank you again, Marian.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Much appreciated. Obviously, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I've been working for Ian Vasquez, who is a Spanish speaker, for almost 2 decades. Unfortunately, my Spanish is not very good, and so I cannot present in Spanish. It will have to be in English, but I hope that our audience can understand me and can keep up. Before I start, just a quick question. Can you all see my presentation with the first page? So, what I would like to spend the next 30 minutes or so talking about is a book which I co-authored. It came out on August 31st, and it is a book called 10 Global Trends Every Smart Person Should Know, and many others that you will find interesting. As Roberto mentioned, I am a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, and I also run a website called humanprogress.org. And perhaps of interest to some of you will be that I also am author of the Simon Abundance Index. My co-author is Ron Bailey. He is an award-winning correspondent for Reason magazine. It was his idea 2 years ago to combine our forces and to come up with the book, which I'm going to present to you today. So the book itself is doing rather well. For 5 weeks, it's been #1 in Amazon's statistics, as well as globalization and politics, and we are very proud of that. As you can see here from the layout, the book is meant to be a very easy to understand book, which is not heavy on theory, but it is very heavy on graphics. So no matter where you open the book, on the left-hand side, you will see 300, 400 words. On the right-hand side, you will see a chart. And the words will explain what you can see in the chart. Now, the book itself, as I mentioned, is not heavy on theory. It is supposed to be easy to understand and easy to get through. In fact, it is the first book of its kind that we published at Cato because it is intended to be a coffee table book. meaning that instead of the book sitting on a shelf somewhere gathering dust, it is supposed to be on the coffee table, which is why it's so beautifully designed and graphically designed and glossy pages and all that. So that when your friends or family come over, they can flip through it, and maybe it will spark a conversation. Did you know that the world is much richer than it used to be before? Did you know that poverty has declined massively in the last 50 or 60 years? That sort of thing. So the book is divided into a number of sections. The first section, and the only section that I will talk about, is 10 global trends. These are the most important trends that we have identified. But of course, there are 68 other trends in addition to the 10 trends, which have to do with humanity. We call it the people trends. We talk about natural resources in greater depth, about farming and agriculture, about technology, health, violence, the nature and the extent of work, and then we conclude with a number of trends about the United States in particular. But other trends are global. It's just that the last section is devoted to the United States. So what I want to start with is to talk about the first trend, and that is the great enrichment. Those of you who are familiar with the work of Deirdre McCloskey will know that she coined this phrase called the great enrichment. Now, the important thing about this chart is to notice the blue line at the bottom of the graph. And as you can see, going back all the way to year one, the global economy was basically flatlined. And you could take it all the way back to 10,000 years BC, and what you would see is that the global economy was really growing at an imperceptibly small rate. And then, at the end of the 18th century, and especially in the 19th century, the global economy really took off. And the effect that you can see before you is what we call the hockey stick effect. There is the long shaft at the bottom, and then over the last 200 years, the upward facing blade showing you the tremendous enrichment of global society. In about 1800, 1820, the global economy amounted to about $1 trillion. By 2015 or 16, it amounted to $90 trillion. So in the last 200 years, we have increased the global wealth by a factor of about 90. And this is really unprecedented in human history. Never before has wealth been generated and sustained over that long a period of time. Now, of course, there were periods like in the Ming Dynasty in China, or during the Enlightenment period in the Muslim world, when different parts of the world have grown. We call those instances of economic flourishing an efflorescence of economic flourishing. But those were usually short-lived, and they usually petered out, and humanity has reversed or returned back to the usual poverty and drudgery of everyday life. The last 200 years are really different in a sense that we have managed to accelerate economic growth and sustain it for a very long period of time. Now, of course, because the world is becoming much richer, poverty is declining. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is to say around the year 1800, roughly 9 out of 10 people who lived in the world lived in absolute poverty. By absolute poverty, I mean living on about $2 per person per day. And that was the state of humanity since really the start of the agricultural revolution some 12,000 years ago. So roughly 90% of humanity lived on about $2 per person per day. And that is where our definition of absolute poverty comes from. Now, at the time when Ronald Reagan became president of the United States in 1981, about 40 years ago, still about 40% of humanity lived in absolute poverty. And just to bring it even closer to, just to make it even more tangible, I'm hoping that today many of the participants of this conference will be young people who may be around 20 years old. And here is what I want you to take away from this particular slide. In the year 2000, which is to say 20 years ago, 29% of humanity lived in absolute poverty. Today, it's about 8%. So if you are a 20-year-old boy or a 20-year-old girl, I want you to know that during your life, absolute poverty has declined from about 1/3 of humanity to less than 8%. Never before, said the Brookings Institution, have we seen such rapid and extensive reduction in global poverty in human history. Now, the third trend I want to talk to you about is very close to my heart because it is based on my research, and it has to do with the abundance or availability of natural resources. So what I did together with a co-author, Gail Pooley from University of Hawaii, Brigham Young University of Hawaii, what we did, we looked at the prices of 50 commodities from 1980 to 2018. Those 50 commodities include things that you need for manufacture of cars or roads, things like steel or things like aluminum, but they also included food items, things like chicken and beef and shrimp and oranges and coffee and tea and so on and so forth. We did not select these 50 global prices. We took them from the World Bank, which tracks their prices going all the way back to 1980. And here's what we found. If you looked at the prices or the nominal prices of these 50 commodities, what you see, and that's fine, was to take it a step further. You see, there is a problem with real prices. They do not account for the increases in income per person. Real prices simply show you whether something adjusted for inflation is cheaper or expensive. But if during the same time people's incomes increase, real prices don't reflect that, which is why we have created time prices. Time price is the blue line, and a time price basically refers to the amount of time that you have to work in order to earn enough money to buy something. So it's the time that you have to spend at work, the labor time, to earn money to buy something. Obviously, if you have to work for an hour to get a box of oranges in 1980, but then if you have to work for 30 minutes in 2018 to buy a box of oranges, that means that the time price has actually declined by 50%. And based on these calculations, we have concluded that the global commodity prices of 50 commodities over the last 40 years have declined by about 65%. Now, here's the interesting thing. Global population has increased by 64% over the same period of time. That means that for every additional 1% of increase in human population, we have seen 1% decrease in commodity prices. So instead of food and other resources becoming more expensive due to overpopulation, as the critics maintain, what we have found, in fact, is that commodities have become cheaper as population grows. Speaking of population, I want you to take a look at this particular chart. And this is obviously the population of the world from 2015 to 2100. As you can see, the population of the world is going to continue to increase until about the 2060s and 2070s. Then it will plateau, and then it will start declining. This particular research has been recently updated by Lancet, which is a highly regarded British publication, and which found the following. Today, there are in the world 7.8 billion people. In 2100, there will either be 8.8 billion people or 6.8 billion people. There is obviously some uncertainty, but the bottom line is global population is not going to increase indefinitely. We may end up with as many people in 2100 as we have today. We may end up with a little bit more, with a little bit less, but there's no question that population growth will slow and will start shrinking. Why? Because people around the world have fewer babies. As women get more educated, as they enter the workforce, the opportunity cost of staying at home increases. Therefore, as women gain more independence, as they gain more education, as they enter the job market, they have fewer and fewer babies. In fact, the only place with a total fertility rate that is substantially over the replacement level, the replacement level is 2.1 children for a woman, 2.1 children for a woman. Only in sub-Saharan Africa is total fertility rate per woman around 2.4, 2.5. In many other places, women already have fewer babies than is the replacement level. In the place where I come from, Czechoslovakia, women have roughly 1.3 babies during their lifetimes, which is well under the replacement level. Obviously, other cultures such as Japan and Western Europe face similar problems. So instead of overpopulation, by the end of this century, we may be looking at a problem of underpopulation. The next thing I want to show you is access to calories. When I was growing up in the 1980s, I remember terrible images of people starving to death in Africa. Today, famines have pretty much disappeared from the world. The only place where you still have famines today are in places which are heavily mismanaged by their governments, such as Zimbabwe, or places which are suffering from conflict. The number of calories which are available to an average inhabitant of the world has increased from roughly 2,200 calories to almost 3,000 calories between 1961 and 2017. Just to give you a sense of how many calories, the United States Department of Agriculture recommends that people should consume on average 2,000 calories per day. So we have reached about 3,000 calories per person per day, which are available for human consumption. That doesn't mean that everyone in the world has access to 3,000 calories, but what it does mean is that we are producing more than enough food to feed the world. So that's the blue line. The orange line refers to increases in food production in sub-Saharan Africa. Today, people in sub-Saharan Africa have roughly access to as much calories as the Portuguese did in the early 1960s. So instead of famine and hunger, people in sub-Saharan Africa are as well off when it comes to food as the Portuguese were in the early 1960s. In fact, in much of Africa, we are now seeing an increased problem with obesity, especially in urban areas and especially amongst women. This chart will perhaps surprise some of you, and that is tree cover loss or gain over the last, close to what, about 35 years. I want you to look at the orange line, which shows you how many more trees are being planted in the world rather than being decimated. That's the blue line. And on the other side of the graph, I would like you to pay attention to the blue dot. If you see the blue dot to the right of the dotted line, that means that the region in question is adding more trees rather than losing trees. Obviously, in every region in the world, there is loss of trees going on. And as you can see in Asia, the net change is well beyond the dotted line. That means that in Asia, right now, they are planting many more trees than they are losing. The same is true in Europe. In Europe, in fact, there is almost no loss of tree cover. The trees are only expanding. In North America, we are still see some loss of trees, but many more trees are being built, and therefore the net change is still positive. In Oceania, it's pretty much in the middle. The same goes for Africa. There is slight deforestation going on, but not much. they're still planting a lot of trees. The problem really is South America, where you are adding trees, but at the same time, you are taking a lot of trees out of the circulation. So in Latin America, we are seeing net loss of tree coverage. But globally, the picture is very optimistic indeed. The next slide has to do with urbanization. There are reasons why we included this particular trend. Well, there are two reasons why we included this particular trend, why urbanization is good. Urbanization is good for two reasons, maybe more, but two important reasons. One is economic. Since the birth of agriculture and the establishment of the first cities, cities have always been the drivers of human progress. It is in the cities that economic growth today takes off, but it is in the cities that we have financial system, which obviously was originated in Amsterdam and in London and today in New York City. So because of network effects, a lot of people working together, exchanging ideas, living close to each other, and cooperating, cities are the drivers of economic growth. So today already well over half of humanity lives in cities, and by 2050, something like 70% of the world will live in cities. And so we would expect that economic growth will also accelerate due to this urbanization, or rather that urbanization will contribute to economic growth in the decades to come. The second reason why urbanization is very important is because of its ecological effect. Believe it or not, people who live in cities consume less energy and have less of an effect to live on a farm. Just think about it this way. If the population of New York suddenly left and lived on a farm, they would have to travel longer distances. They would have to consume more fuel and contribute to CO2 emissions. And of course, they would deprive nature of a lot of land. We would have to retake a lot of land from nature and from wild animals. Whereas now, because of urbanization, we are concentrating the human effect on the environment in a number of specific places, and therefore we are able to leave more and more land to nature. Another trend I want to talk to you about is the trend in democracy and authoritarianship. As you know, democracy has really taken off after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the breakup of the Soviet Empire. And we have seen a massive increase in the number of countries that qualify as democracies in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. However, in recent years, we have seen some democratic retraction. My argument, based on the data which are available, is that we shouldn't panic yet. We should be concerned about the future of democracy which are available, is that we shouldn't panic yet. We should be concerned about the future of democracy. We should keep our eye on it. But there is certainly not seen some sort of a massive decline in democracies around the world. In fact, my own prediction is that as we move into the future, it will be more and more difficult for governments to deny their people their basic dignities, because the information that people consume is basically free. It doesn't matter whether you're a woman in Saudi Arabia or a peasant living in Kenya. You can see that people enjoy a lot of rights and a lot of dignity in other parts of the world. You can see it on the internet. You can receive information on your phone. And I think that moving to the future, people in areas which may be lacking in democracy will start demanding more and more rights for themselves. So are we concerned? Yes. Are we seeing a fully fledged retreat of democracy? No. The ninth trend has to do with the occurrences of war. As Steven Pinker has documented in his book, Better Angels of Our Nature, but other research has also replicated his findings. We are living through a remarkably peaceful period in the history of humanity. That does not mean that conflict doesn't happen. Of course it does. However, compared to the 1970s and the 1980s, the world is a much more peaceful place. Most of the conflicts in the world today are civil wars. They are not wars between independent countries. Today, as far as I can tell, there is only one hot conflict, hot meaning it's still going on, conflict between two sovereign nations. And that is the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which broke out about 2 weeks ago. There are frozen conflicts, such as between South Korea and North Korea, or between Russia and Ukraine. But when it comes to a shooting war between two independent countries, as far as I know, are the only ones in the world in 2020. And even then, the two countries have so far not declared war on each other. I cannot think the last time that one declared war on another, perhaps with the exception of the Korean War. Now, what governments which still get involved in conflict eschew an outright declaration of war because war is becoming something of a rarity, and may that long last. The last slide I want to talk to you with deaths from natural disasters. Natural disasters are things which are unpredictable. These are things like tsunamis and earthquakes. Nobody can see them coming. Act of God, as we used to refer to it in the past. They are not man-made, they spring from nature. They are totally unpredictable. And yet, over the last 100 years, the number of fatalities from natural disasters has declined by 99%. Why is that? How come that if we cannot predict where these natural disasters come from, how come that fewer and fewer people are dying from natural disasters? And the most persuasive answer I've come across is that it is because we are becoming wealthier and more technologically savvy. As people are able to build sturdier buildings, they no longer get credit. Those buildings survive earthquakes. Also, we have become more technologically savvy. We have, for example, satellites, which are able to tell us that there is a hurricane forming in the Caribbean. We have sensors which can detect an earthquake at the bottom of the ocean floor, and consequently, it can alert us on the coasts that there are huge waves coming, so that people have time to go and in a higher ground. So basically, because the world is enjoying, we have not only become safer from one another, but also from nature as well. So unfortunately, the book had sold out its first printing. So those of you who are thinking about buying it will have to wait a little bit longer. However, by the middle of this month, we will have the second printing, and you'll be able to once again purchase it on Amazon or anywhere else. Please follow our work on different social media, and please visit humanprogress.org and follow.
Marian Tupi, tenemos unos breves minutos, yo creo unos 10 minutos aproximadamente para algunas preguntas. So Marian, I'm going to defer to the audience the time myself, and we have a great question here from our audience about what are your views concerning climate change? Contrary to your optimism, there seems to be this apocalypse concerning climate change that has somehow, unfortunately, captured the mentality of many of the young people that are listening to us today. And so that's one question. What are your views and Ron's views on climate change? And another question is perhaps tell us a little bit about what would be your first, second, and third pick concerning technology trends looking forward. So maybe we can address those two.
Thank you. So climate change is a massive subject, and I'm going to try to be brief, although I don't know if I'll succeed. I'm certainly going to mention Ron's views. He can speak for himself, but from my perspective, look, climate change has always happened. The world's climate has always changed. The scientific consensus seems to be that of warming going on, and that this warming could have negative consequences for humanity. Now, that to me seems like an opening rather than a closure of conversation. But the real question then is, what is true? What is humanity going to do about it? And in my opinion, what we need to do is to adapt and to innovate our way from potential problems which are coming down the line. Which is to say, and this ties into your second question about technological developments, is that I don't see any harm in supporting and promoting research and development in those technologies, cheaper and cleaner fuels in the future. Right now, the world already has a technology which could provide us with plentiful energy with no CO2 nuclear energy. Unfortunately, the same people who keep on talking about the apocalypse are the same people who refuse to engage with nuclear power. That is a terrible mistake. It shows a level of hypocrisy that is really very difficult to stomach. We should be building more nuclear power stations. We can build them smaller. We can build them safer than was the case before. That's what we should be doing. We should also spend money and time looking into fusion reactors, just two which are even safer than fission reactors. So the current nuclear power is fission reaction, where we split atoms. What we want to do is to get a super safe fission reactor, which will combine atoms and create energy out of that. As of last week, there seems to be now a much more of a scientific consensus among physicists that fusion is possible. And so we should be spending money and effort on that rather than building windmills and solar panels, which have their own peculiar problems, not least of which is that we cannot rely on them to provide us with a reliable source of energy. So I accept what the majority of the scientists seem to be saying, which is that there is a bit of global warming going on, that there is climate change going on, and it could be potentially harmful. But we are not going to solve this by restricting people's access to energy and restricting their consumption. Nobody wants to do that. People in the West don't want to do it. People in underdeveloped countries don't want to do it. And it would be immoral to force them to do it. So instead, let's try to come up with sources of energy which can provide us with plentiful energy, but without CO2s. I think that we can do it. We already have technology. We can improve on it. The second thing that I am very excited about when it comes to technology is the excellent progress being made in biotechnology. We are living through COVID pandemic, obviously, terrible thing as it is. We are going to have a vaccine within a year of the identification of the pandemic. A lot of people have lost lives. A lot of people have lost their loved ones. But the bottom line is that never before in human history have we been able to produce a vaccine as quickly as we are able to do it in 2020. But that's just one part of biotechnology. There are other exciting things going on with CRISPR-Cas9 and genetic editing. We might be able, within a few decades, to do all sorts of wonderful things, not only defeat cancer, but also by many, many decades.
Excellent. We have, I think, 5 minutes, and you touched the topic of COVID, which of course is also fueled a great deal of the apocalyptic ultra pessimistic mentalities concerning the future of the world and the future of the ideas of liberty. But perhaps to this audience, you can share what those of us who were around in 1995 and were beginning to make our first appearances at the Cato Institute, what would have happened had we been struck with a COVID-19 pandemic back in 1994 or 1995?
Well, the first and the most important thing that would have happened is that we wouldn't be able to identify, decode, and share information about COVID as speedily as we can now. So think about it this way. The Chinese have known about pneumonia in late December. By mid-January, they were able to identify a new virus. Within days, they were able to decode its genome and then send it by email to every scientist in the world saying, work on it and try to save it. If this happened only 15 years ago, of course, we didn't have the kind of technology that would permit us to rapidly decode the genome of a virus. And I think that 1995 was just about when email was taking off. I think very few people in the world had emails, and being able to communicate very fast in a matter of seconds with the scientific community and sharing information with them would have been much more difficult. I mean, you know, medical science back then still relied on printed journals rather than online journals to be able to read about the latest developments in healthcare. But I think the most fundamental issue would have been that we wouldn't be able to genetically decode the virus. And so our ability to then plug that information into supercomputers and look for molecular structures in existing medicines that could defeat the virus would have been impossible. So many more people would have died.
Bueno, entre otras cosas, además de mucho mayor número de muertes que se hubieran dado digamos, en 1995, por todo lo que nos ha explicado Marian Tupy, pues también tenemos que no tendríamos oportunidades como estas, de poder estar entablando un diálogo de esta naturaleza a través de tecnologías como las que tenemos de comunicación hoy en día, ya sea Zoom o Google Hangouts o cualquier otra tecnología de Microsoft, de Skype, con nuestros teléfonos que se han convertido en aparatos móviles, la enorme expansión de FinTech, tan solo para países emergentes, lo que ha sucedido con Venezuela, que gracias a que tienen acceso a las tecnologías financieras hoy en día, pueden de alguna forma mitigar esa enorme barbarie y esa enorme crisis humana que están viviendo hoy en día. Y así ha pasado en otros países, ciertamente en el caso de México, en donde las remesas, y gracias a las tecnologías, las remesas están sosteniendo una caída que no se había visto en la economía desde la Gran Depresión. Y bueno, no voy a hablar del caso de Argentina, pero sabemos por varias fuentes y varios de nuestros amigos, varios de ellos aquí en este congreso los próximos días, que ha sucedido algo similar. Yo les quiero recomendar ampliamente, no tan solo que lean el libro de Marian y de Ron Bailey, otro espectacular intelectual en la materia, sino que sigan muy de cerca humanprogress.org. Y ojalá haya alguna versión en español en un futuro para todos los jóvenes que nos escuchan. Esto es precisamente el tipo de narrativas que nos van a permitir combatir, ya sea el sentimiento del socialismo milenial o el romance de lo que hoy se habla como Democratic Socialism en los Estados Unidos, porque al final del día, Human Progress, el progreso humano, descansa en la libertad de los individuos de que puedan trabajar, de que puedan hacer elecciones en una forma libre, puedan intercambiar en una forma que sea libre y voluntaria. Habrá otra oportunidad en un futuro de hablar de esto, y de hecho, este fue un preámbulo, un magnífico panel. Ahora le voy a pasar la palabra a Federico, que va a ser Federico Fernández, que es el moderador del próximo panel, justamente de la red Somos Innovación. Marian, I want to thank you for wonderful, wonderful participation, spectacular presentation. We hope to use some of its findings, which is a nicer way of saying plagiarizing. This is really a great deal of very constructive thought where most of our young in Latin America and all over the world should be focusing on. And we hope to see you again virtually or physically in another setting, and keep up the fantastic work.
Thank you very much for those very kind words, and very good luck with the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Federico, es todo tuyo. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes. Roberto Salinas del Center for Latin America de Atlas Network.